Now, Paul Manafort was sentenced Thursday to nearly 4 years in federal prison. So the charges, of course, range from tax evasion to bank fraud. This is one of several trials that Paul Manafort is going to have, or I should say several sentencing hearings that Paul Manafort will have for the numerous amount of crimes that he has been found guilty of committing. Now, for these specific charges of bank fraud and tax evasion, he was facing a possible 20 years in prison. Now, the judge, in this case, T.S. Ellis, went actually super soft on him. He ended up actually getting about 4 years. So that's 47 months. And so that's a really light sentence compared to what he had actually been facing previously. Now, the judge said that though Manafort had committed serious, very serious crimes, yes, he also said that Manafort had, quote, lived an otherwise blameless life and earned the admiration of many. Who are those people that admire Paul Manafort? Really? Look, I don't see why, but okay. Now, here's the thing. Paul Manafort screwed the government out of millions of dollars in taxes. He literally hid $30 million of his money that he got from lobbying for Ukraine as a foreign agent and then stuck it away overseas. He stole $30 million. And not only that, but the money that he had left, of course, he used to buy ridiculous things. For example, he spent $15,000 on an ostrich leather jacket, $2 million on home TV and internet setups. Now, look, I'm not saying like, oh, you should never be able to have any of that stuff. No, but you shouldn't be able to commit bank fraud and hide money in taxes from the government and live that kind of opulent lifestyle. In fact, prosecutors wrote that Manafort, quote, had an expensive lifestyle that required lots of money to maintain and used that as important proof as to why he would commit bank fraud. So he's not a good guy. Those are the choices that he made. So he did all this stuff. He had very expensive tastes, and he defrauded the government and stole money and did bank fraud, all in order to be able to continue living that opulent lifestyle. Come on. He's guilty as sin. And yet, he gets 4 years. Oh no, I'm very embarrassed. Oh, I'm very embarrassed. And I'm humiliated. Well, he should be. Now, in addition to 47 months in prison, Ellis ordered Manafort to pay a $50,000 fine and approximately $24 million in restitution, and to spend an additional 3 years in federal supervision. Ellis said that the 9 months Manafort has already spent in jail should count against his total sentence, which, of course, that made the prosecutors furious, because they argued, and this is Greg Andrews, he said that the defendant had made criminal choices as recently as 2016 and 17, referring to additional offenses Manafort committed while under indictment in a related case in Washington. He is a criminal. He is a, long-time criminal. And his criminality flew in the face. Hey, look, this guy made a plea deal, went back on that plea deal, and then got caught. His criminality is obvious. Obvious. And he had no remorse for doing any of this stuff. No, his only remorse is, hey man, I got caught. Now I feel bad. Now I'm embarrassed and humiliated. Now, in fact, this is what Greg Andrews said. He said, Mr. Manafort himself made criminal choices, and those choices have consequences. Mr. Manafort broke the basic civil covenant in this country. You have to pay your taxes. Now, of course, there are some people out there saying, oh, this decision wasn't political, etc. But look, in reality, there's always politics involved, one way or the other, right? And so this shows people that, hey, go ahead, don't pay your taxes, because you're not going to get punished as much. Or, if you don't pay your taxes, don't get caught. Don't get caught. and then you can almost completely get away with it. Now, they also pointed out that he was the mastermind of a years-long scheme to defraud American banks and taxpayers out of millions of dollars he amassed through years of illicit lobbying work on behalf of a pro-Russian political faction in Ukraine. Now, this has nothing to do with Russian collusion, etc., right? And made sure to point that out. Then the judge himself actually thought that the Mueller investigation is not a good thing, right? He actually publicly said negative things against the Mueller investigation and said, oh, the only reason that you're trying to throw the book at this guy is to get him to sing against Donald Trump. So we're not the ones making it political. It looks like the judge made this political. Now, they've said he did not pay taxes on his massive wealth, hid money in several foreign bank accounts, and lived extravagantly, as I pointed out. But here's the thing, right? Here's why I didn't get punished. Because rich people don't get punished the same way that we do. And by we, I mean regular people. But then there are people who are African-American, Latino, minorities, who get punished even worse. There are people in prison right now with much harsher sentences for possessing drugs. You can literally get put away for life, and people have been, for having a joint. You think the judge would go lenient on those people? No, of course they don't. No, there are people in prison for longer than Paul Manafort for stealing $30. Manafort stole $30 million. And yet, we're going to feel sorry for them? We're going to feel sorry for Paul Manafort and give him a very short sentence in a likely minimum security facility? You've got to be kidding me. Now, in case you're confused on my argument, right? I'm not saying we should bury Paul Manafort under the jail and lock him up for 150 years. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is maybe we need to have some better standards in sentencing, because we seem to have a lot different standards in sentencing going on. Look, and of course, part of that is federal sentencing guidelines, right? So some of those guidelines are arbitrary, some of them are wrong, and there's a justice system that, of course, is stacked against regular people and against especially people of color. We need to fix that. But what I want here is parity, right? So, look, if Paul Manafort can steal $30 million or shield it from taxes, etc., then we should be able to be a little bit more lenient on somebody who steals $30 or selling untaxed cigarettes. There's a man, Eric Garner, who was literally choked to death by police officers for, not at the time, but for having before, sold untaxed cigarettes. They're 30 cents or whatever. But no, Paul Manafort gets 4 years for stealing $30 million. Eric Garner loses his life for 30 cents. Is that justice? Is that justice? That's not at all justice. That is injustice. Look, man, going back to Ellis here, he said that the sentencing guidelines, which called for 20 to 24 years in prison, would be, quote, excessive. Did they say anything about how Eric Garner's death was excessive? About how, putting people away for marijuana, for cocaine, for drugs, for nonviolent offenses, is that excessive whenever it's a poor person? Whenever it's a black person? No. There are two justice systems. There's one for us, and then there's one for the rich. Judge Ellis probably looked at him and thought, well, man, look, he's just like me. There, but for the grace of God, go I. He's an affluent white man. Yeah, he's made mistakes, and, he's admitted to them, and now he's paying the price, and he has to pay a price. But let's not be excessive. I mean, he's old. He's almost 70 years old. I mean, I'm not going to put him in for the rest of his life. No. A couple years, and then he can go back to try to live what's left of his life. Or whatever, man. Whatever. Look. He's only embarrassed. And I mentioned the humiliated and embarrassed, etc., right? This is what Manafort had said for doing this. No, he was embarrassed about getting caught, right? He was only humiliated for getting caught. And I don't think he at all cared about the crimes that he was committing while he was committing them. I think he is somebody who doesn't have remorse whatsoever. And you can look at the pattern of criminality that he had exhibited for decades, right up until he got caught. No. Look, Manafort, by the way, Manafort's not out of the woods. He will be sentenced again, apparently next week, in a related case in Washington where he faces an additional 10 years in prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy charges for failing to report that he is an unregistered foreign lobbyist. Not only that, but he also faces charges of witness tampering. Now, in that case, there is a different judge. So, maybe, hopefully, he will actually get a fair sentence and end up going away for a long time for the criminal that he is. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.